Hello, it's great to have you here. If you enjoy thrilling romance stories, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single story. The sky over the Arizona territory had turned the color of a fresh bruise. Harvey spurred his weary buckskin, his eyes squinting against the wind that whipped sand into his face like 1,000 tiny needles. He'd been tracking 3 stray longhorns for 2 days, and the land was growing harsher, the familiar rolling plains giving way to the stark, crimson majesty of canyons and mesas he knew belonged to the Navajo. His employer, a stern man named Albert, had been clear. "Find them steers, Harvey, but don't you dare cross onto their lands. More trouble than they're worth." But the storm didn't care for maps or boundaries. It had rolled in from the west with the speed of a charging bull, swallowing the sun and unleashing a torrential downpour. The dry earth, baked hard by a relentless sun, couldn't absorb the deluge. Waterfalls of mud and rock began to cascade down the canyon walls, and the arroyo he was following transformed into a raging chocolate-brown river in minutes. His horse, Buck, a normally steady companion of 5 years, whinnied in terror. The ground beneath them became a treacherous slurry. One moment they were on solid-looking ground. The next, a section of the trail gave way. Buck screamed, a sound of pure agony that tore through the roar of the storm. Harvey was thrown clear, his shoulder slamming into a jagged rock with a sickening crack of pain. He rolled, gasping, the cold mud sucking at his boots, and saw the source of Buck's cry. The horse's hind leg was twisted at an unnatural angle, the bone clearly shattered. A cold dread, sharper than his own pain, pierced Harvey's heart. He crawled to his friend, his hand stroking the trembling, wet hide. The horse's eyes were wide with panic and pain. Harvey knew what he had to do. It was a mercy he'd administered before, but it never got easier. His hand shook as he reached for the Colt peacemaker holstered at his hip. "Easy, boy. Easy now," he whispered, his voice choked with rain and sorrow. The single shot was a flat, ugly sound, swallowed almost instantly by the storm's fury. Now he was alone, afoot, injured, and trespassing. The pain in his shoulder was a hot, throbbing fire, and a wave of dizziness washed over him. He needed shelter. Pushing himself to his feet, he gritted his teeth and scanned the chaotic landscape. Through the sheets of rain, he spotted a dark fissure in the rock wall of the ravine, a shallow cave, barely more than an overhang, but it was something. It was survival. He stumbled towards it, clutching his useless arm to his chest. Every step was a battle against the sucking mud and the blinding rain. By the time he collapsed into the relative dryness of the shelter, he was shivering uncontrollably, soaked to the bone and bleeding from a dozen small cuts. The world outside was a maelstrom of wind and water. He huddled at the back of the small cave, pulling his knees to his chest, and watched as the last of the daylight was extinguished, leaving him in a world of roaring darkness. He must have passed out, for when he next opened his eyes, the storm had quieted to a steady, drumming rain, and a figure was standing at the mouth of the cave, silhouetted against the bruised twilight. It was a woman, but she was unlike any woman he had ever seen. She was tall, impossibly tall. Even from his position on the ground, he could tell she stood a full head taller than him, and he was not a small man. Her shoulders were broad, her frame powerful, yet possessing a distinct feminine grace. Her long black hair was woven into a single thick braid, slick with rain, and her face, carved with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, was a mask of stoic beauty. She wore a simple tunic and leggings of tanned hide, adorned with intricate beadwork that glinted faintly in the dim light. She held no weapon, yet her very presence radiated an unassailable authority. Her dark eyes, sharp and intelligent as a hawk's, swept over him, taking in his muddy clothes, his pale face, and the way he cradled his injured arm. She took a step into the cave, moving with a silent, fluid grace that seemed to defy her size. "You are on the land of the Diné," she said. Her voice was low and resonant, like the rumble of distant thunder. It held no malice, only a statement of fact. Harvey tried to push himself up, a jolt of agony shooting through his shoulder. "Ma'am," he rasped, his throat raw. I meant no disrespect. My horse, the storm." She held up a hand, silencing him. She moved closer, kneeling beside him. The scent of wet sage and pine needles clung to her. Her gaze fell to his shoulder, where the fabric of his shirt was torn and stained dark with blood. Without a word, her large, capable hands were on him. He flinched, expecting roughness, but her touch was surprisingly gentle yet firm. She probed the area around the wound with an expert's precision, her expression unreadable. "The bone is not broken, but the muscle is torn," she diagnosed, her voice calm and certain. She then looked past him, her eyes finding the shape of his dead horse in the gloom outside. A flicker of something, understanding, perhaps even sympathy, crossed her face. The storm has claimed many things tonight. She rose and disappeared back into the rain. For a moment, Harvey thought she had left him. A profound sense of desolation washed over him. He was helpless, at the mercy of this strange, giant woman in a land where he did not belong. But she returned moments later, carrying a leather pouch. Kneeling beside him again, she opened it, revealing a collection of dried herbs and roots. She selected a few, crushed them between her palms into a dark, fragrant paste, and then, with unwavering focus, began to apply the poultice to his wound. The mixture was cool and soothing, and almost immediately, the fiery pain in his shoulder began to recede into a dull, manageable ache. She then tore a strip from her own buckskin leggings and expertly bound his arm against his chest, creating a makeshift sling that was both secure and comfortable. Harvey watched her, mesmerized. Her every movement was deliberate, efficient, filled with an ancient knowledge that felt as elemental as the rock and rain around them. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice filled with genuine gratitude. "I'm in your debt. My name is Harvey. As soon as this rain lets up, I'll be on my way. I won't trouble you or your people any further." He made a move to get to his feet, to show he was ready to leave, but her hand shot out and clamped onto his good arm. Her grip was like iron. It wasn't painful, but it was absolute. He couldn't have moved if a grizzly was charging him. He looked up at her, startled, and saw that her dark eyes were fixed on his, their intensity almost hypnotic. The air in the small cave crackled with a sudden, unspoken tension. "You will not be leaving," she stated, her voice dropping to a near whisper, yet losing none of its power. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold snaked down Harvey's spine. "Ma'am?" She leaned closer, her face just inches from his. He could see the flecks of gold in her dark irises, see the resolute set of her jaw. She was not asking. She was not suggesting. She was declaring. "A vision came to me on the wind of the storm," she said, her voice a low, commanding thrum. "It showed me a man with the prairie sky in his eyes and the dust of solitude on his shoulders, broken and lost in the scarlet ravine. The spirits led me to you." She paused, her gaze unwavering, searching his face for something he couldn't name. "The vision was clear. You will not leave this place tonight." Her grip on his arm tightened slightly, a silent emphasis on her words. Then she delivered the final, stunning blow, a declaration that defied all logic, all reason, all the known rules of his world. "You will come with me. You will be safe. And you are going to be my man tonight." Harvey stared up into Gouyen's unyielding face, his mind struggling to process her words. "My man tonight." The phrase, so bold and possessive, was utterly alien to his world of gruff nods and unspoken understandings. A dozen different thoughts collided in his head. Was it a threat? A promise? Some kind of Navajo custom he had stumbled into with the clumsiness of a spooked calf? He was injured, disarmed of his horse and his bearings, and utterly at her mercy. Fear was a cold knot in his stomach, but beneath it, something else stirred, a profound, weary curiosity. The dust of solitude she had spoken of was real. It was a cloak he had worn for 5 long years, and for the first time someone had seen it. I don't understand," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You will," Gouyen replied, her tone softening slightly, though her grip remained. "The spirits do not speak in riddles for those who are meant to listen. Now can you walk?" She released his arm, and the decision was made for him. Arguing was as pointless as trying to halt the rain. He used a rocky outcrop to push himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. The world tilted for a moment, and her large hand was instantly at his back, steadying him with a touch that was both powerful and surprisingly gentle. Without another word, she turned and began to lead him out of the ravine, her long strides forcing him to push through the pain to keep up. The journey was a blur of mud, rock, and shadow. The storm had passed its peak, leaving behind a sky of bruised indigo and a world washed clean and dripping. Gouyen moved through the treacherous, flood-damaged landscape with the certainty of a mountain lion, her eyes scanning the path ahead, her bare feet seeming to find purchase where Harvey's worn boots slipped and slid. She led him up a winding, hidden trail that snaked up the canyon wall, a path no outsider would ever find. With every step upward, the air grew thinner, cleaner, scented with pinyon pine and wet sage. After what felt like an hour, they crested a rise. Below them, nestled in a protected bowl-like valley, was her village. It was not the chaotic camp of Harvey's imagination. but an orderly collection of hogans, round, sturdy dwellings made of logs and earth, arranged in a wide circle. Smoke curled from the central smoke holes of several thin grey tendrils against the darkening sky, carrying the comforting scent of burning wood. The sound of dogs barking and the low murmur of voices reached him, a testament to a life that was both ancient and vibrantly present. As they descended into the valley, figures emerged from the hogans. The villagers' faces turned towards them, and a wave of silence fell over the settlement. Every eye was fixed on him, the bedraggled Bilagaana, the white man, being led into their midst by the formidable Gouyen. He saw curiosity in the eyes of the children who peeked from behind their mothers' skirts, suspicion in the hard stares of the older women, and something else, something cold and challenging, in the eyes of the men. One man in particular stepped forward, blocking their path. He was tall for a Navajo, broad-chested and muscular, with a proud, hawkish face and eyes that burned with resentment. His name was Bidzil, and his gaze was locked on Harvey like a predator sizing up its prey. "Gouyen," he said, his voice a low growl. He spoke in the Dene language, but his meaning was clear in his tone, and the angry gesture he made towards Harvey. Gouyen did not stop. She met his gaze without flinching, her own expression a mask of calm authority. She replied in their tongue, her voice firm and level. It was a short, sharp exchange. Bidzil's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tightening, but he did not move to stop them further. He stepped aside, but his hateful stare followed Harvey all the way to the largest hogan near the center of the village. Inside, a fire pit in the center cast a warm, flickering glow on the circular walls. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and cooking herbs. An old woman with a face like a beautiful wrinkled map looked up from her weaving, her eyes holding the wisdom of generations. She nodded slowly at Gouyen, her gaze lingering on Harvey with an unreadable expression, before returning to her work. Gouyen gestured for Harvey to sit on a pile of soft sheepskins near the fire. She gave him a gourd of cool water, which he drank greedily, and a piece of flatbread that tasted of corn and ash and was the most delicious thing he had ever eaten. He sat in silence, the warmth of the fire slowly seeping into his chilled bones, his shoulder a dull, persistent throb. He was an island in the center of this world, surrounded by a language he didn't speak, and customs he couldn't fathom. Later, as the last light faded from the sky, the village gathered around a large central bonfire. The flames leaped high, painting the faces of the Dene in hues of orange and red. Harvey was led to the circle and given a place to sit, with Gouyen taking her place beside him. The air was filled with the rhythmic beat of a single drum and the low, chanting voice of an elder. Bidzil sat across the fire, his glare never leaving Harvey. When the chanting finished, a heavy silence fell. All eyes turned to Gouyen. She rose to her full, magnificent height, her shadow dancing on the ground behind her. She began to speak, her voice carrying across the fire circle clear and strong. She spoke in her own language first, her words flowing like a powerful river, and though Harvey couldn't understand them, he could feel their weight, their importance. He saw the expressions on the faces around him shift from suspicion to surprise, to murmurs of disbelief. Then she turned her gaze to him. "I have told them of my vision," she said, her voice now quiet, meant only for him. "The vision that came as the storm broke. It showed me a protector was needed. It showed me a man would come brought by the sacred waters, broken but not defeated." She knelt in front of him, bringing them eye to eye. The firelight danced in her dark irises. "My vision told me this man would have the prairie sky in his eyes," she continued, her gaze searching his, "and the dust of solitude on his shoulders, that he would carry a loss that hollowed him out, but that his heart was still true, like the heart of the mountain." Harvey's breath caught in his throat. It was as if she had peeled back the layers of his soul and seen the raw, aching wound he had hidden from the world for so long. The clear blue of his eyes so often commented on, and the crushing loneliness that had been his only companion since he'd buried his wife, Alice, and their infant son 5 years ago, taken by a fever that swept through their small homestead like a prairie fire. He had been wandering ever since, a ghost of a man, working just enough to keep moving, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. "How could you know that?" he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. "The spirits show what is true, not what is hidden," she answered simply. "They showed me your strength, Harvey. Not just the strength in your hands, but the strength to endure. Our people are being threatened. A rancher, Floyd, wants our land. He wants the sacred spring that gives us life. He poisons our streams and drives away the game. My people need a protector who understands the ways of the Bilagayana, but who has a heart that can be joined with ours." Suddenly, her shocking declaration in the cave began to make a terrifying, profound sense. It wasn't about a fleeting physical demand. It was a spiritual contract, a pronouncement of destiny. She had seen his soul, recognized him from a vision, and claimed him as a partner in a struggle for her people's survival. To be her man meant to stand with her, to join his fate with hers, to become a part of her world. He looked around the fire at the wary faces, at the hostile glare of Bidzil, and back to the unwavering strength in Gouyen's eyes. For the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than the dull ache of loss. It was a flicker of purpose, a terrifying, exhilarating spark in the ashes of his hollowed-out life. He had been found, not just in a cave, but in the wilderness of his own grief. He met her gaze, and for the first time he let her see past the lonely cowboy, past the grief to the man he had been. "My wife and my son," he said, the words feeling like stones in his mouth. "Their graves are a long way from here. I've been running from that patch of ground ever since." A flicker of deep compassion crossed her features. She reached out and placed her large, warm hand over his. It wasn't a gesture of pity, but of profound understanding. "You are not running anymore," she said softly. "The storm has brought you home." The days that followed were a strange and challenging education for Harvey. He awoke each morning in the warm, earthy-smelling hogan to the quiet movements of Gouyen and the old woman, her grandmother, who was called Sky Blossom. He learned to be silent, to observe. His life as a cowboy had been one of vast, empty spaces and the simple company of cattle and horses. Here he was woven into the intricate tapestry of a community. Every action, from grinding corn to tanning a hide, was done with a purpose and a reverence that was new to him. His shoulder healed quickly under Sky Blossom's expert care, the poultices and gentle manipulations easing the deep ache until it was only a faint memory of pain. But another kind of wound remained open, the deep-seated suspicion of the Dine. Most were polite but distant, their eyes holding a cautious reserve. And then there was Bidzil. The warrior missed no opportunity to remind Harvey that he was an outsider. The challenges were never direct. One morning, as the men prepared for a hunt, Bidzil publicly questioned whether the Bilagana's eyes, so pale and accustomed to open plains, could possibly track a deer through the complex shadows of the canyonlands. It was a clear taunt. Gouyen's jaw tightened, but before she could speak, Harvey stepped forward. "I can track," he said simply, his voice quiet but firm. Bidzil laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. He pointed to a set of faint tracks near the edge of the camp. "A coyote passed in the night. Tell us, cowboy, how long ago? Was it male or female?" A tense silence fell over the gathered hunters. It was a test of skill, a public humiliation in the making. Harvey knelt, his fingers hovering over the impressions in the damp earth. He noted the depth, the slight drag of a paw, the spacing of the gait. He'd spent years reading such stories in the dust. "It was a male," Harvey said, rising to his feet and meeting Bidzil's glare. "Heavier on his front paws. He passed about 3 hours before sunrise, moving fast. He wasn't hunting. Something spooked him from the east." An old hunter, a man with a face like carved cedar named Ahote, knelt to examine the tracks himself. He looked closely, then rose and gave a slow, deliberate nod. "He speaks the truth," Ahote declared. "The tracks are deep for a fast gait." He was running. A murmur of surprise went through the men. Bidzil's face darkened, his pride stung. He had expected the outsider to fail, to prove himself useless. Harvey had not only succeeded, but had added a detail, that the animal was running from something that even Bidzil had missed. From that day on, the warrior's hostility simmered with a new, more dangerous intensity. Harvey's relationship with Gouyen, however, deepened with each passing day. It was a connection forged not in soft words, but in shared actions. He helped her tend her small flock of sheep, his skilled hands mending a broken fence. She, in turn, showed him which plants were medicine and which were poison, her deep knowledge of the land a constant source of wonder to him. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and he would tell her about the stars from his perspective, naming the constellations he knew, while she would share the Dine stories woven into the same night sky, tales of Coyote the trickster and the hero twins. In these quiet moments, the immense loneliness he had carried for years began to dissipate, replaced by a warmth that settled deep in his chest. He found himself watching her, captivated by the way she moved, a combination of immense power and serene grace. He admired the unwavering strength in her eyes when she spoke to her people, and the gentle kindness in her hands when she comforted a crying child. He was falling in love, not just with the woman who had saved him, but with the world she embodied. The fragile peace was shattered one afternoon when two boys came sprinting back to the village, their faces pale with panic. They had been watering the sheep at a small secondary creek a mile down the canyon and had found a dozen of them lying dead at the water's edge. Harvey, Gouyen, and a grim-faced Bidziel led a party to the site. The scene was sickeningly still. The sheep lay where they had fallen, their bodies bloated. A fox and several crows also lay dead nearby. The water in the creek, normally clear, had a faint, oily sheen. Harvey knelt, sniffing the air. There was a faint, acrid chemical smell underneath the scent of decay. He dipped a finger in the water, avoiding touching the dead animals, and rubbed it between his thumb and forefinger. It felt slick, unnatural. "It's poison," he said, his voice hard. "Arsenic, maybe, the kind they use for dipping sheep to kill ticks." "Floyd," Gouyen breathed, her hand clenching into a fist. "This is his work." Bidziel's face was a mask of fury. "He attacks our animals. He poisons the water the Earth Mother gives us. We must ride to his ranch and make him pay in blood." Several of the younger warriors murmured in agreement, their hands moving to the knives at their belts. "No," Harvey said, standing up, his quiet voice cut through their anger. "That's what he wants you to do." All eyes turned to him. Bidziel scoffed. "What would you know of the white man's treachery? You are one of them." "I know exactly what he's doing," Harvey countered, his gaze steady and cold. "I've seen it before. This isn't just cruelty. It's a strategy. He's not trying to kill you all, not yet. He's pushing you. He poisons a small creek, one you can afford to lose. He's testing your resolve. He wants you to attack his ranch to give him an excuse to call you savages and bring in the cavalry. He wants the law on his side when he drives you out." A heavy silence fell as the warriors considered his words. They were men of action and honor, and the idea of such calculated, cowardly warfare was foreign to them. But Harvey's logic was undeniable. "The cowboy is right," Ahote, the old hunter, said gravely. "Floyd is a snake. He would not fight an honorable battle." Gouyen looked at Harvey, a new level of respect in her eyes. "He speaks with wisdom," she announced to the others. "Bidziel postguards at the sacred spring. It is the heart of our land. That is what he truly wants. We will not be baited into his trap." Bidziel glared at Harvey, his hatred warring with the undeniable sense of the plan, before giving a curt nod and barking orders to his men. That night the mood in the village was somber. The loss of the sheep was a blow, but the poisoning of the land was a deeper wound, a sacrilege. Harvey found Gouyen standing alone on a bluff overlooking the silent valley, her tall frame a silhouette against a sky littered with stars. "You saw the truth today," she said without turning. "You saw the path inside his mind." "I've worked for men like Floyd," Harvey said, coming to stand beside her. "Men who see land as something to be owned and broken, not something to live with. They see your people as an inconvenience, a problem to be cleared away." "And you?" she asked, finally turning to face him. Her eyes searched his. "What do you see?" He looked away from her intense gaze, out at the vast, beautiful and threatened land that had become her home and was beginning to feel like his. He thought of his small, dusty homestead, of the wife and son he had lost, of the 5 empty years that followed. He had been a ghost, drifting with the tumbleweeds. Here among her people, in her presence, he was starting to feel solid again. He was starting to feel alive. He reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. The buckskin was soft beneath his calloused fingers. "I see a home," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I see a people worth fighting for, and I see a woman whose strength makes the mountains themselves seem small." She did not pull away. Her hand came up to cover his, her large, warm fingers enveloping his own. The silence between them was no longer one of observation or uncertainty. It was a silence of profound connection, a shared understanding that ran deeper than words. The vision had brought him here, a broken man, but standing beside her, their hands joined under the vast, starry sky. He felt whole. He was no longer just the lonely cowboy. He was Harvey, and he was hers. The threat of Floyd hung over the village like the shadow of a circling vulture. Scouts reported that he had ridden to the nearest town and returned with a dozen rough-looking men, hired guns whose loyalty was bought with whiskey and silver. Harvey's prediction had been right. Floyd was done with subtlety. He was preparing for a direct assault, convinced that his numbers and rifles would overwhelm the Navajo. The target was clear to everyone: the sacred spring, the lifeblood of the Diné, hidden deep within the heart of a winding canyon. A council of war was held in the firelight. The mood was grim. A direct defense of the spring would mean a bloody battle in the narrow canyon, a fight they might win, but at a terrible cost. It was then that Harvey, standing beside Gouyen, spoke. "Fighting him on his terms is a mistake," Harvey said, his voice steady, commanding the attention of the warriors. "He expects you to line up behind rocks with bows and arrows. We won't do that. We'll use the land itself as our weapon." He looked at Gouyen, a silent question in his eyes. She understood immediately. "There is a way," she said, turning to the council. "A high path, known only to us, that runs along the western ridge of the canyon. From there one can look down upon the main trail." She then looked back at Harvey. "And the buffalo have returned to the high mesa. A small herd, but strong." A plan began to form, a fusion of two worlds. Harvey's knowledge of strategic misdirection and Gouyen's intimate understanding of the terrain. They would not fight Floyd's men directly. They would use the canyon's geography and the raw power of the buffalo to create a force that no amount of rifles could stop. But the plan required perfect coordination and total trust. It required every warrior. Harvey looked across the fire at Bidzil, whose face was a stony mask of conflict. Pride warred with pragmatism in his dark eyes. "This is the white man's trickery," one of Bidzil's followers muttered. "It is the trickery of the fox, not the blind rage of the bear," countered Ahote, the old hunter. "I have seen this cowboy's mind. It is sharp. He fights to protect this land, our home." All eyes fell on Bidzil. It was his moment of decision. He could let his jealousy and pride condemn them to a bloody fight, or he could embrace this strange new alliance. He looked at Harvey, then at Gouyen, who stood unmovable at Harvey's side, her belief in him absolute. With a deep breath that seemed to carry the weight of generations of pride, Bidzil gave a sharp, decisive nod. "We will do this," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The warriors will be ready. Tell us what must be done." A current of relief and unified purpose passed through the circle. The tribe was now one. 2 days later, their scouts sent the signal. Floyd and his men were riding into the canyon. They moved with an arrogant swagger, rifles resting casually on their saddles, laughing and joking as they desecrated the sacred land with their presence. They had no idea they were riding into a trap meticulously laid by the very earth they sought to conquer. High above on the western ridge, hidden among the pinyon and juniper, Harvey lay beside Gouyen, peering down at the trail. His heart pounded a steady rhythm against his ribs, not with fear but with a focused, cold intensity. Below, Floyd's men were approaching the narrowest point of the canyon, a section where the walls closed in and the trail was little more than a rocky ledge. On the far side of the high mesa, out of sight, Bidzil and his warriors were in position, waiting. Gouyen placed a hand on Harvey's arm. Her touch was grounding, a silent current of strength passing between them. "Now," she whispered. She lifted her head and let out a perfect, piercing cry of a red-tailed hawk. The sound echoed through the canyon, sharp and clear. It was the signal. An instant later, a chorus of war cries erupted from the far side of the mesa, followed by the crack of a few scattered rifle shots fired into the air. Then came a new sound, a low rumble like distant thunder that grew rapidly into a deep, earth-shaking roar. The ground beneath Harvey and Gouyen began to tremble. The buffalo appeared. They came over the lip of the mesa, not as a scattered herd, but as a single unstoppable force, a brown, horned river of muscle and panic. Bidzil's men had startled them perfectly. The terrified animals thundered down the slope, not directly at Floyd's party, but across their path, creating an avalanche of rock, dust, and pure primal power. Panic erupted below. The hired guns' horses screamed and reared, their eyes rolling in terror. The wall of dust and charging beasts was a vision from hell. Men were thrown from their saddles. Horses bolted, scattering in every direction. The carefully organized party of invaders dissolved into a chaotic scramble for survival. The hired guns, their courage vanishing in the face of the stampede, abandoned their rifles and fled on foot, scrambling up the canyon walls to escape the maelstrom. In the midst of the chaos, Floyd was bucked from his horse, landing hard in the dust. He came up sputtering, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, to find himself utterly alone. The thunder of the stampede receded, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the clatter of a few loose stones. Harvey didn't hesitate. He slid down a steep scree slope, his boots finding purchase, and landed on the canyon floor a dozen yards from the stunned rancher. He walked toward Floyd, not reaching for the Colt at his hip, but for a folded piece of paper in his shirt pocket. Above them, on the ridge, Gouyen stood watching, a silent, towering sentinel. Bidziel and his warriors appeared on the opposite ridge, their presence a clear, unspoken threat. "My men!" Floyd stammered, scrambling for his rifle. "Where are my men?" "They ran," Harvey said calmly. "Turns out they were only paid to fight men, not the mountain itself." He stopped before Floyd, unfolding the paper. "This is over. You think you've won?" Floyd sneered, his fear turning to bluster. "I'll be back with the army. I'll tell them how you savages attacked us." "No, you won't," Harvey said, his voice dropping to an icy calm. He held out the paper. It was a crude map. "I did some tracking of my own. About 5 miles upstream on federal land, you built a dam, a small one hidden in the brush. You've been illegally diverting the main creek to your own ranch for months. That's why the water levels were low down here even before you started your poisoning games." He tapped the paper. "This map, along with my sworn testimony, is going to the territorial marshal. The law you wanted on your side? It's going to put a rope around your neck for stealing federal water. You're just a common thief, Floyd." The color drained from Floyd's face. He was beaten, not by arrows or bullets, but by his own greed and a lonely cowboy's sharp eyes. Utterly defeated and exposed, he dropped his rifle, turned and scrambled away, a pathetic figure disappearing down the canyon. Back in the village, the celebration was not loud or boastful, but one of deep communal relief. The threat was gone. Their home was safe. As the fires burned bright, Bidziel approached Harvey. He didn't offer words of apology, but his actions spoke louder. He met Harvey's gaze and clasped his forearm in a warrior's grip, firm and unyielding. "You have a DNA heart, Harvey," he said, the highest praise he could offer. In that moment, Harvey was no longer an outsider. He was a brother. Later, when the moon was high, he found Gouyen on the same bluff where they had stood before. The canyons below were bathed in silver light, peaceful and timeless. He stood beside her, the comfortable silence between them now filled with a deep, abiding love. "My vision said a protector would come," she said softly, her eyes on the horizon. A slow smile touched Harvey's lips. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. It just failed to mention he was the one who needed saving first. She turned to him, and for the first time, he saw her smile, a wide, brilliant smile that seemed to light up the night. It transformed her strong, stoic features into something of breathtaking beauty. "The spirits work in strange ways," she said, her voice warm. She squeezed his hand, her gaze returning to his. "The prairie sky in your eyes," she murmured, "has finally found its home." He looked into her deep, knowing eyes, and he knew it was true. The restless dust of solitude had finally settled. His long, aimless journey was over. He would not be leaving. He was home. True strength is found not in isolation, but in the courage to connect with another soul. It teaches that home is not a place you are from, but a person you find, and that love can bridge any divide, healing past wounds and forging a future stronger than any single person could build alone. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to confirm your subscription and leave a like. It helps us out a lot.